We now move to public contributions. This evening we will be devoting up to an hour for public contributions. These contributions are invited via the Council's website, and we have 2 speakers this evening and other questions submitted for me to read out. I'm going to start with the 2 speakers this evening and then move on to reading out the question. So I'd now like to ask Toby, Laurent, Belson to speak for up to 5 minutes on the Westway Trust. Toby.
Yes, good evening. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for welcoming me here to speak this evening. I'm going to be speaking about the Westway Trust. There is a motion this evening to do with the Westway Trust and our recent review into institutional racism, which found that the organisation has been and is institutionally racist. I would say that I've come to this meeting with a little bit of apprehension or perhaps dubiousness, and that's really comes from effectively me feeling very much as though I'm in the belly of the beast this evening. I should say that that's not something that is aimed at specific individuals of this council. It's really about the institution that is the council. It is about the institutions that exist in the UK, that exist in London, that exist across the world. Ours in particular, the Westway Trust, has undergone this review. And I'm here to talk today as the chair of the Westway Trust. I'm here as some perhaps small but important change that has occurred at the Westway Trust that has been created through our community. 5 minutes really is it's an inconsequential amount of time for me to be here in my position and with my experience to discuss this. I might go so far as to say it's a disrespectful amount of time, bearing in mind the issues that are to be spoken of here. And I can't hope to speak about racism in 5 minutes. I cannot hope to speak about institutional racism in 5 minutes. I cannot hope to speak of the experiences of North Kensington as a community across 50 years in 5 minutes. That would be a joke. I'm here because of the sacrifice of many members of this community, including the sacrifices, of course, that I've made to be here. And you have a motion this evening that really is a beginning of exploring some of these issues. This review is very much the opening of a box that has been held tightly shut by the institutional culture that has been instilled and sustained by this council over 50 years. Next Friday, it will be 50 years to the day that the Westway Trust, previously the Westway Development Trust, and previous to that, the North Kensington Amenity Trust, was inaugurated. And so it does seem like a fitting time to begin these conversations. But they are really very much a beginning. This motion this evening is a beginning. And as I said at the beginning, I have some apprehension and some dubiousness around this motion and around how this motion will be received by the council, how amendments have been put forward to it, and how we can continue this conversation in the manner and with the intention that it really deserves. So I think that will be about all for me now. I think I don't really want to use up all of the time. I just don't think it's really worth it, because I'm here really to listen I'm really here to listen to your intentions around this motion, around racism, around Westway Trust, and around your intentions to the community of North Kensington. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Toby, thank you very much, and thank you for your contribution to the meeting this evening. Now I'll ask to ask the Leader of the Council, Councillor Elizabeth Campbell, to respond to that, please.
Well, Toby, first of all, I'd like to say thank you. Thank you very much for coming this evening. Thank you very much for your comments, and thank you for addressing the full council in this way. As you said, we'll be discussing the Tutu Foundation review later on the agenda, but you're right, it's the beginning. But I'd just like to say once again that I think it's really important that the council takes publication of the Tutu Foundation's review as a proper opportunity to reflect upon the role it played in enabling institutional racism to develop at the Trust. And I'd just like to start and reiterate what I've said previously, which is I'm very sorry for any part that we played in this. And you're right, it is a beginning. And I'm really encouraged by the work already started by the community groups who are involved in driving change at the Trust, which we fully support. And as you know, I'm also keen to explore ways in which the Council and the Trust can work together in the future. Again, as you said, 5 minutes is too short to talk about racism, and I look forward to speaking to you about this, amongst other things, in the future.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, do you wish to respond, or one of your colleagues from the Labour group?
Yes, of course, Toby's right. 5 minutes is just a flash in the pan, but I think it's good that you are now chair of the Trust, which would have been unthinkable even a few years ago. And back in 1998, people like us and you were, and I have the correspondence to prove this, were called loonies. We could not let the loonies take over the Trust. So in a sense, the motion and everything it represents is like shutting the door on that once it's been recognised. You recognise what happened. And there has to be some kind of recognition, formal recognition by the council of what happened. The members of the council on the majority party side, I don't think any of them were there during the last 30, 40 years, and I think there were a few of ours on the Labour group side who were there. So it's a case of taking responsibility and working forward. It's true that, I mean, it's beyond doubt the institutional racism, the Tutu Foundation report lays out in brief, I would say, because as I said at the time, I think that what actually happened was far, far worse than what the Tutu Foundation report actually said in print. The reality of what happened was far worse for the people, the staff members, the staff there who were completely without any type of support, either from, and I'm talking about ethnic minority staff now in particular. Everybody was harassed, but especially them. There was no support whatsoever from them, and there was no support from the management committee. And the management committee, of course, was led in reality by the majority party members who were there. So we need to recognise what happened. A lot of people's lives were damaged, were very damaged, and there's a lot of evidence there. And I will release the papers over the next, from tomorrow, over the next couple of weeks, and the jury of the public can decide for themselves. But it's very good that Councillor Campbell has agreed that of course she's sorry for what happened, and she personally wasn't there then, but the council as an institution had an iron grip over the Trust, which hopefully it will fully relinquish, because of course the correspondence and the documents that mysteriously disappeared from the Trust offices after the late director left, some of those documents disappeared, but I recovered some of them before he was, or somebody was able to remove them, and they tell a story. They tell a story of a sort of moat castle mentality, where the trust did not trust, saw the community as the enemy, and would have seen people like you, Toby, certainly as the enemy back in the day. And there were many people like you and many people in the community who tried to create change, who tried to exhort the council. There are all sorts of motions from Labour opposition councillors of the day trying to get the council to change or to make the aims and objectives of the trust into a reality that would serve the community. So many people tried, and they were either demonised or voted down. And certainly people in the community like you and others back in the day who tried to campaign to make change, they were either legally or legally attacked, or they were character assassinated by the trust stroke council as far as they saw it. So it's good that the council hopefully tonight will recognise what happened, which is what the motion's about. This is what the Tutu Foundation report effectively, this is what happened. And as I say, it's the tip of the iceberg, really, because a lot of the evidence that was given to the Tutu Foundation for this report is not actually included in the report, and maybe there will be further releases. But it's change that is the big thing. It's taken 50 years, as I think you said, 50 years for the people who should be the recipients of the trust to control, to be responsible for the trust. We always said for years that you and the community in North Kensington were big enough and grown up to be able to run their own charity, their own organisation, their own resources, but there were people with vested interests at the council and at the trust who believed that the local community were not fit and proper, or they were not of the proper political persuasion, or that they were communists, or that there was all kinds of phrases used against them. These people could not be allowed to get their hands on the assets of the trust. So hopefully moving forward, and I was one of the, I saw what happened over 30 years, and it was me in 2012 that advised the then Labour group to go back and put someone on the board of the trust, because we'd been off since 1996 because we couldn't be part of what was happening there. So I myself supported that, and now we are here. So we need to put the past behind us with reparation and recognition of what happened, and not sweep anything under the carpet. And then as the council, move forward and support you and your colleagues and the local community to make a success. Success we know that you can and we all will make of the Westway Trust as it exists today. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for indulging me.
Thank you, and we will be spending time on that in the motion later on. So thank you very much. So we now move on to motion number 2, institutional racism at Westway Trust. Members will see that an amendment has been submitted. And Councillor Nagy, are you going to formally move this motion now?
I believe I'm going to. Do it. Yeah,
Mr. Mayor, I would suggest Councillor Mason to propose it.
Councillor Nagy is not feeling very well, so I've agreed with Councillor Mason.
Point of order. Point of order, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor,
what point of order are you raising?
Councillor Mason, I didn't hear at the beginning of this council meeting making any declarations of any conflicts of interest, past or present. And the point is, if I'm not mistaken, Councillor Mason was employed at the Westway Trust many, many years ago before he was a councillor. But not only that, he was dismissed from their employment. And on top
Thank you,
of that,
Councillor Palmer. You've raised your point. Councillor Mason, do you wish to declare an interest?
No, I was employed over 25 years ago. I was not dismissed from the Westway Trust.
Thank you.
But it went to appeal.
No,
I now call upon
read the
Councillor Mason then to formally propose this motion.
Mr. Mayor, it's timely that the council are offering an unreserved apology to the North Kensington community, and especially to the African Caribbean residents. But I think it's wrong to deny any responsibility for the council trustees' part in failing to prevent acts of racism and discrimination against ethnic minority trust employees when there were people in the community and inside the trust who were campaigning for change to the management committee collectively and together, not least the Labour trustees who were on the board at that time. So I have nothing to prove to anyone in this chamber who were not there to witness what happened in those dark days of racism, discrimination and the abuse of power. And only myself and perhaps Councillor Blakeman are left who can testify to what happened inside the trust, and Councillor Atkinson, of course, who also challenged the injustices inside and outside the trust. Councillor Blakeman, in fact, who was a trustee from 1981 to 1996, has an important speech to make that speaks, I believe, to the control the council wielded over the trust. And I see that the Conservative group has struck out the part of the motion that speaks to substantial management and decision-making control by the council, something the documents I have in my possession do not support, and Councillor Blakeman's speech will clarify that. The evidence, of course, speaks for itself if anyone has bothered to read the Tutu report and do more than feel that they have to slide it aside in any way, and hopefully not to cover up the truth that staff and residents of different nationalities were made to suffer. There was an unhealthy, incestuous relationship existing between council and the trust for decades, as can be seen in much of the correspondence and certainly some that I've got in my possession. And the extract I'm going to read to you now I'll explain in a moment why I'm doing it. I have an extract from a letter dated the 9th of November to the council's chief executive, Derek Myers, from the late director of the trust of some 20 years. And in this letter, the trust director is defending himself against an accusation that is being made against him from a certain quarter. Although the extract does not concern that issue specifically, he goes on to tell Mr. Myers, after denying the allegation, he says in the letter, and I'm going to make this public after the meeting, incidentally, Mr. Mayor, he goes on, and this is repeated in many, many letters. You may not be aware, but from 1971 until 22nd of April 1998, the Chief Executive and Town Clerk and the Director of Finance of the Royal Borough were respectively the Honorary Secretary and Honorary Treasurer of the Trust, and papers were sent to the Town Hall, and minutes of our meetings were taken and processed by the committee section. To my certain knowledge, whichever officer actually took minutes would report the outcomes to the Chief Executive and Town Clerk within a day or so of the meetings. This not only seemed reasonable and proper, but, for example, in Mr. Webber's day, which was the former chief executive, it often led to helpful suggestions and advice from him to me sometimes before and sometimes after the management committee meetings. And quite apart from the Royal Borough having 7 nominees on the committee, it is clear that officers also knew the full details of the trust affairs until the 22nd of April 1998. And the point of reading that, which appears in many, many letters and documents, both between trust staff and the council and majority party trustees and the council, and in statements, is that they any time the trust felt threatened or wanted to wield power and influence, and sometimes it was against residents who wrote to the trust, the same paragraph, they trotted out that sort of paragraph to show their influence and power on the council. And as we can see the town hall evidence connection. I could read you more letters that on issues that say the same type of the same type of thing. So it is right, as I said earlier, that the council acknowledges the part it played in the wrongs that happened at the trust, whilst it had influence amounting to operational control, which of course this amendment denies, but in effect is the case, by means of the constitution and agreements and the secret working relationships between the trust, senior staff and the council over 40 plus years, secret from most of the residents they were supposed to be working for. And there are letters that actually discuss between the trust director and, for example, Judge Gerald Gordon, who was the chair of the trust at the time that the Subterranea rates affair was going on, where the connection and the power connection between the trust is ably demonstrated. So this of course is in the past, and it doesn't make any sense to deny these things because these documents exist. By the way, Mr. Mayor, when I gave evidence to the Tutu Foundation and told them the sorts of things I'm saying here, they said that they had access to the trust vaults to look at the records, but they couldn't actually find very much. And I said, well, I was told by a particular officer in the trust that the records had been cleaned at a period, but unfortunately for them, I was able to clean the records before the cleaner cleaned the records. So I was able to hand over a large file to the Tutu Foundation Trust, only a proportion of what they have that they have actually used and released in the report, and I believe that more will be coming. So. As I started by saying, I personally have got nothing to prove to anyone, really. It's like closing the door on for the community on a 25-year, 30-year debacle, and no one can undo what has been done. But you can at least own up to what your predecessors did, because as I said earlier, I'm not suggesting that anyone on the majority party side at the moment was there then, unless I'm mistaken. And as sure as eggs is eggs, denial will come back to bite, because unfortunately there is a large number of documents that to cover. Yeah. So in the end, Mr. Mayor, the jury of the public will always decide who speaks the truth on this issue. And whilst it is good that there is there is an undeserved apology, and there is a recognition, and the leader has made a recognition that she is sorry for anything that previous administrations may have been responsible for. We cannot move on as a council or as a community in North Kensington, and certainly the Westway Trust can't move on until this issue is resolved. A bit like the peace and reconciliation hearings that happened in South Africa when Nelson Mandela became president. It has to be the past has to be resolved and dealt with, and recompense made for, and admissions made for, and failing to admit partially what actually happened really doesn't show very good faith, and it just means that other documents have to be released to show that what is being denied partially here actually was the case. So I move the motion standing in my name.
Thank you very much. Councillor Nog, you are now formally second in the motion. Do you wish to speak, or would you want me to move on to other speakers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for acknowledging that it's really a very stressful situation. Just to concur with what's been said so far, and I hope this will be a start for a healing process for our residents in North Kensington. That's all what I have to say, and our council play the full role into acknowledging what's North Kensington being denied for the last 50 years. So I appreciate that this is acknowledged, and the process only started, and I don't want to go any deeper until be part of a solution for a long-standing problem. So that's all, and then I will give the way to other speakers, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much. Thank you
very much. So I now call the amendment. Councillor Sarin to form the move, and Councillor Taylor-Smith to formally second. Councillor Sarin.
I would like to move, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And I would like to second, Mr. Mayor.
Good. Councillor Sarin, you have up to 5 minutes to speak to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councillor El Naghi and Mason, for bringing this motion forward tonight. I wanted to start by saying how humbled I was to listen to Toby speaking to us this evening as chair of the Westway Trust. I hope I can speak for all of us in thanking him and acknowledging his understandable apprehension. And I also support his comments that 5 minutes is woefully inadequate. Mr. Mayor, the Westway Trust is a vital part of the recovery of North Kensington. Many of the spaces under the motorway were built by the community for use by the community. This was the history of the place after the motorway had cut a neighbourhood in half. The people who lived here, having suffered great hardship, fought for the land and started to rebuild it for themselves. It is this community spirit which continues to this day. The community of North Kensington is highly skilled, highly passionate, but most of all resilient. Resilient because they've endured a disturbing history of racism and deprivation. They've also endured the tragedy of Grenfell, and they are also enduring the current pandemic, which has hit many of our community members in the North very hard, indeed, as referenced by Councillor Press earlier. Mr. Mayor, making the best possible use of this land is more important than ever before. I was a trustee of the Westway Trust. I was there when the Tutu report was commissioned and whilst the evidence was being gathered. The board, as it was then, absolutely supported the need for the investigation to take place, but it was a fight. The trust was clearly broken and was not delivering for local people. Other agendas had taken root. Tutu gave local residents, particularly those from the African Caribbean community, a voice that they had not had before. Those who had suffered various discriminations were able to speak. The community struggle to identify and call out what has gone wrong at the trust is inspiring and was a big part of why this report was commissioned. The day the report was published was an important turning point in the history of the trust. It provides a platform to understand the lessons, apologise, start to heal, and start to move forward hand in hand with the community. A big part of the membership is also local organisations, many of which represent the many diverse voices in the north of the borough. It is also an important moment for this council to understand its role in what happened and acknowledge it. It is part of our own culture change. There is no doubt about the council's involvement in the trust, both historically and more recently. The trust was created as a charity, by definition independent, but the council did have a dominant role through its nominations and historically through the secretary of the trust. We must and do acknowledge this past, and I welcome this amendment with its factual corrections and its unreserved apology. Let there be no ambiguity. We deplore racism and discrimination in any guise, and we will fight to uproot it and eradicate it. The trust lost its way and began to operate in isolation of community needs and wants. You only have to walk down the estate to see the results of this. Although much loved, the spaces don't look how we want them to be. The stables is a prime example. For over 20 years, through Sarah Tuvi's leadership, the stables supported vulnerable and deprived children with equine therapy and respite. The trust should have done everything it could to support her, but instead it shut the stables down, rightly provoking local anger and a petition of over 3,000 names. And now for 6 years, the land lies empty, the community deprived of this much loved community asset. Just how the trust completely lost its way. There are some gems in the trust, good things that we need to build on. For example, the supplementary schools programme run by Val Patterson. The community centre at Bay 20, although born from justified suspicion, now provides a welcoming community space and during the pandemic is supporting some of our most vulnerable residents, thanks to the work that Fiona and her team are doing. But all this makes clear what needs fixing. I really hope we can build a good working relationship with the community board to support us, that local people feel real ownership of and feel connected with. We want to move forward together to get these spaces working for the community and offer our support to this organisation, which, like many others, is struggling because of the pandemic. And I applaud the courage and devotion of the new chair and the whole board who have stepped up, and already good progress has been made. I do not underestimate the importance of the task or the challenge. I have learned from my 5.5 years at the Trust that change is hard. It always takes longer than you hope, and it's never a straight road. But I do hope we can look to the future now in true partnership with Toby, Laurent, Belson, his board and the community. and I hope we as a council can all unite to support this aim. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor-Smith, do you wish to speak to the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And again, I'd like to thank Councillor Mason and El-Naghi for bringing this motion, and also my thanks to Toby for coming and speaking to us today, albeit briefly. So in the immediate aftermath of the Grenfell tragedy, this council adopted the Hillsborough Charter in terms of truth and candour, and this amendment respects this commitment. And it's very important that this council on both sides of the chamber offers an unreserved apology and acknowledges the part that it has played in the Tutu findings. I mean, racism is such a blight on our society, and it has such a profoundly negative impact on our residents' lives. And there is absolutely no place for it in 2021, and we must seek to root it out wherever it exists. And it is all our responsibilities to tackle and challenge it wherever we see it. I don't want to repeat what Anne has said, which I completely agree with. I would like to focus on the part of the motion which supports the efforts by the community groups and individuals who have driven change at the Trust, and to talk about our commitment to be part of that change. And this is something obviously Toby has referred to. And this council commits to work collaboratively with the Westway Trust to ensure that our respective land holdings are used for the maximum possible community benefit. We as a council have 11 properties under the Westway, and actually the majority of those do meet this objective. We have the Pepper Pot, the Moulton Road Hub, the pop-up retail units, and soon the Maxilla City Club. And these are four good examples of buildings we own and are using that directly will benefit the community. On Monday, I attended the first meeting of the Maxilla City Delivery Board, which oversees the work of the resident working group and the council officers, who are co-designing the community and adult social care centre in Bays 17 to 19 under the Westway. But this is not a problem that is simply bricks and mortar. And the unanimous agreement of the attendees was that the most important outcome will be building a foundation of a system of truly collaborative working between residents and the council, and empower the residents into designing and shaping future council space. Now this is not going to be an easy process, and we're starting from a position of very low trust and a history of doing to rather than doing with our residents. And this is amplified as a reason for this motion. But, you know, we've started positively, and I'd like to highlight this project, both as not only a new way of working, but also of how we may collaborate with the Westway Trust on our land holdings. Like the Westway Trust, we also own property that generates income to support our services. And it's important to acknowledge that our corporate property department was sometimes too focused on income generation and did not adequately assess or appreciate the detriment to cherished community assets. And it was a charge that was also levied at the Westway Trust Board too. And it is the reason behind the change of name of corporate property to social investment. But it's also the rationale behind the development of a new groundbreaking approach to our land and property holdings, where commercial considerations are not the primary consideration, but we also viewed as an enabler for the council policies and priorities. And that's not to say that income generation is now obsolete, and we have to incorporate it in our approach rather than making it front and centre. And our land holdings include a lease to a private school, which would be an interesting debate on the value to the local community, or the value as a vital source of funding for council services. Social investment will not always mean community centres. Every councillor here will understand the importance of commercial income towards supporting vital council services, and sometimes that may well be the best option. But I believe that there's no better response to the findings from the Tutu Foundation than to ensure that we do our best to make sure that our own property, not only just the property that we have under the Westway, but across the rest of the borough, is delivering the best outcome from our residents. So to conclude, Mr. Ware, you know, we are one of the most diverse boroughs in the country, and it is something that we are inherently proud of here at the council. And this makes the findings of the Tutu report all the more shocking. Therefore, this apology is incredibly apt and very timely, and equally, it's a commitment to work with the Westway Trust on our respective land holdings to ensure that we get the maximum community benefit. Thank you. I beg to read.
Thank you. Councillor Ali, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wish to speak to support the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Go on, then.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I were to speak about my experience as someone who's been in the north of the borough and North Kensington, I've been working in the field of communities as well as education, housing, and anything else that's got to do with the non-profit organizations as well as charitable. I think I have the right to speak to this motion and actually support as someone who has experience of more than 1/10 of a century, Mr. Mayor. I have been looking into the what the Westway has been claiming that they have been doing and the report itself. So if I just give you a summary of what the Westway has been claiming that they do, they said we exist to work together with the local community to enable North Kensington to thrive. They also say, Mr. Mayor, we dedicate ourselves to the well-being of vibrant community, and they also have a good vision, as it sounds. The Westway Trust's vision is sustainable well-being in the north of North Kensington, and they divided, Mr. Mayor, into 3 parts: social well-being, environmental well-being, as well as, more importantly, economic well-being. Finally, the organization's vision. The organization has also 4 values, which are quite important. If you look at it, it says it starts with openness, credibility, reliability, and responsibility. Mr. Mayor, one can argue that the organization's vision as well as the values are not worth the paper they are written on, as they have now been found as institutional racist organization. And I think this we need to look into in the long term. I think it's about time, Mr. Mayor, for this organization to change, and the change must come and no later than sooner, because we need this change sooner than later. Mr. Mayor, it's about time this organization to work with the local people to open up its trustee positions to the local people who value the local communities and also recruit from local. However, having heard from the current chair of the organization, I would suggest, Mr. Mayor, that it's not time for the organization to change its name to make sure it's run away from its past, as it did so far 3 times. I think changing the name of the organization from Westway Trust to something else will not be helpful in the long term. Also, dismantling the organization will not solve the problem, Mr. Mayor. As we all know now, the Westway Trust have now stated that they accepted all the recommendations laid out in the Tutu Foundation report and have apologized to the entire community for the wrongdoing committed against them over the years. The communities with origin of African, Caribbean, Middle Eastern, Asian, and other minorities have been subject to sustained racism over the years by the organization which is supposed to support them and to help them thrive in our borough and in our community. We therefore not just accept or call for or demand unreserved apology, but this organization must have a change of culture sooner than later, Mr. Mayor. The families and the children who have been subjected to the racism over the years, Mr. Mayor, could have been the leaders of our borough, and indeed could have been the leaders of our country if an equal opportunity would have been given. But it clearly shows that this organization have denied members of our community that I belong to. They have not been given opportunities due to racism, and this cannot longer go. And I would say, Mr. Mayor, to finish it off, the communities that have been subjected to the racism and the ones that have been mentioned, the African, Caribbean, Middle Eastern, and Asian and others, we know when you serve communities, Mr. Mayor, you'd never know who is coming from them. And I think it's a great example to use as someone who has got a mixed heritage. For example, the Vice President now of the United States, she has a South Indian mother and a father of Caribbean, Jamaican. Imagine, Mr. Mayor, if she did not have the opportunity she had in her time, she would not have been holding today the second highest office on the face of the earth. I think it's about time to look at the communities that we serve. They are human beings, they have the talents, and we should be given an equal opportunity. And I think we should allow, and the council should allow, the Westway Trust to make the change necessary and not to dictate what's required by a majority, but what's required by the community that it serves. And I therefore support the motion, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call upon Councillor Rossi, who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Martin Luther King said that a riot is the language of the unheard. Now, I don't condone violence, but what this eminently peaceful and courageous man was saying was that race, segregation, and prejudice were tearing the fabric of the United States apart, that attention must be paid to injustice, and that dire consequences can flow from not listening. About the same time, in the US, the term institutional racism was coined. Institutional racism is more insidious than overt racism, and so is more difficult to pin down and more difficult to combat. It took the tragic and racist murder of Stephen Laurent in 1993 to provide us with Macpherson's definition of institutional racism, which we use today and is used in the Tutu report on the Westway Trust. Whereas the murder of Laurent was an act of determined racism, Macpherson was looking into the collective failure of the Metropolitan Police to investigate and prosecute this crime. It is said that there are two faces of power. The hidden one, like the dark side of the moon, prevents issues and voices being raised in the decision-making process. So I would like to thank the members of Westway 23 for forcing us to address this issue, for commissioning the Tutu report, and for establishing a board which reflects the North Kensington community. I, like every other member of this chamber, owe an apology, a heartfelt apology, to the people in North Kensington and also to the staff at the Trust for our part in allowing institutional racism to exist at the Westway Trust. For my own part, I have to say sorry for my ignorance of what was going on at the Trust, despite being a councillor for more than 10 years. The Westway Trust was created to serve the community, and though I believe there were good intentions at the start, things soon went wrong. It forgot simply what it was for, and at times excluded the very community it was created to serve. This injustice has to be corrected. It has been a privilege for me to be a trustee at the Westway Trust for the past 6 months. In Toby, Laurent, Belson, who you've all heard speaking tonight, we have an inspirational chair, and the board is made up of committed individuals who all contribute fully to promoting the necessary changes. The board has a clear sense of direction and a very clear set of values. It has a mandate from the community it serves and a will to drive through vital change. Like Toby, I see this watershed moment as a beginning. The Tutu report recommends that the Trust become independent of the Council, which I fully understand, though I am happy to continue for as long as they want me to stay. With independence, a new relationship with the Council must be forged, and that is what I hope we are all doing here tonight, and that the Council will fully support the Trust going forward. Finally, racism is a moral issue, and it is above party politics, so I hope that we can all come together on this motion tonight. Today is Holocaust Memorial Day, and we should all remember that the ultimate expression of racism is genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bakhtiar, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just something very simple, because most of the things I was going to say was said by my colleagues. I just want to remind us that all of us, scientific DNA mapping and scientific research prove that nearly most of humanity are descended from a single mother from Africa, she was alive just over 200,000 years ago. This is enough to tell us, that we are all coming from the one source. We are all equal. No one is better than the other. This is very simple, basic fact we need to remember. And I'm very glad that I'm expecting a good future for the new mine management. Can you hear me, Mr. Mayor? Hello?
Hello?
We can
Yes,
hear
we can
you.
hear you. It's very faint, but we can hear you.
Yes. Let me disconnect the headphone. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, if you speak up, we're okay. Thank you.
Okay. I was just repeat that DNA mapping and scientific research proved that almost all of human beings on the planet descended from a single mother who lived just over 200,000 years ago, and she was from Africa. This proves that we are all coming from one source, almost one source. We are all equal, and I am optimistic that the new management or the new trustees of the Westway Trust will do what they ought to do for their communities in North Kensington, and we all are here to support them in any way they need us to be there. Thank you.
Thank you. Call upon Councillor McVeigh to speak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to fellow councillors for some really heartfelt and excellent speeches just now. This is the one motion that I really wish we were actually in the physical chamber for, because I'm sure there would be many members of the community in the gallery for this motion. And if they were, I would turn to them and I think we would all acknowledge them and thank them for all they have done to highlight this injustice and to bring about positive change in the Westway Trust. And if it's okay, I just want to name a few of them who I've come across that spring to mind in an acknowledgement of their hard work. And first of all is Toby, who spoke earlier and who's now chairing the trust, doing, as Mary-Therese said, a very focused and great job. And Tanya and Piers, Angela, Niles and Esme, Shireen, Eve, Tom, Ed, Huey, Marcia. And here in this council, there's Anne and Monica, and more recently, Marwan and Mary-Therese. So thank you to all of you, and of course the CAG, and to many, many others who've also been involved in highlighting this issue and acting on it and bringing about change. I live in the area of the Westway Trust and know it well. It's a huge physical entity that dominates the area. And when I became a councillor in 2018, I also became a trustee and strove alongside others to try to bring change to the trust and working through precisely some of the issues that are highlighted in the report. As Toby says, the report is a beginning to explore some of the issues. And Anne just mentioned that the Westway Trust has lost its way. And that is true, though over time it has done some amazing things like the sports centre, its supplementary schools, and working with the traveller community. But sadly, it has also failed to do many things it could have done. And that is what we're speaking about today. And reading the Tutu report brings that, again, sadly, into stark relief. And I am sorry for all the hurt that has been caused over the years. The Tutu report mentions several influential figures and elders in the community, such as Roden Gordon, Rothwell Kentish, Pepe Francis, Wilf Walker and Clive Phillips, who all tried to do so much for the community, but were not supported. And this is where change needs to happen. As Angela Spence said about the report, it shows that there is no place for complacency and ignorance in what should be a just society. So the Tutu report is about acknowledging the harm that institutional racism does and then working to change it. As the 1999 Macpherson inquiry says, there must be an unequivocal acceptance of the problem of institutional racism and its nature before it can be addressed as it needs to be. So this is why we are here discussing this tonight. And this motion and the amendments to it are crucial in accepting the report and our part in it, and to support the need for change. So I'd like to end with some wise words from Canon Nontobi Naomi Tutu about the report. She says, it offers an opportunity for us to use it as a model for the work of racial healing that is needed in so many institutions. So, Mr. Mayor, I look forward to seeing this healing. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakeman, would you like to speak, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's very interesting that no one so far has acknowledged that the change of attitude on the council's behalf only happened because of the Grenfell tragedy and 72 lives that were lost. And I think it's important to make that point. I am someone who was demonised by the Trust for many, many years, and I'm speaking, and it's another history lesson, I'm afraid. I'm speaking to explain how the Westway Trust, which was then known as the North Kensington Amenity Trust, was able to exercise its power over the local communities in a way that was approved, supported and endorsed by the then council through its domination of the board of a so-called independent organisation. In 1987, as the only Labour trustee, I sent a paper to the late Guy Mayers, another trustee, for his discussions with former councillor Richard Walker Arnott about the Trust constitution. This constitution ensured the council's control over trust decisions, which, as the Tutu report indicates, enabled it to act in a way that was institutionally racist. The principles governing the Trust Constitution were first set out in a paper approved by the Council's Coordinating and Policy Committee on the 16th of June 1969. These proposals included the intent that the Council would set up an independent body that would be serviced by Council officers, and to maintain the Council's firm control, I quote, firm control over the Trust. The Town Clerk and Borough Treasurer would be Secretary and Treasurer of the Trust. Then a subcommittee of the Coordinating and Policy Committee prepared a draft constitution, which the full committee agreed on the 2nd of November 1970. And this was the constitution that met the council's objective of retaining firm control. It appointed 7 trustees, and it ignored proportionality by including only one Labour member representing the North Kensington wards. There were 7 community trustees and an independent chair with 2 votes in the event of any tied vote, who had to be approved by the council, and one long-serving chair, for example, was a former Conservative councillor. Furthermore, although council-appointed trustees bound by confidentiality, they were also required to report to the town clerk any issue of interest to the council, and correspondence between the leaders of the council's ruling and minority groups in 1982 confirmed that council appointed members could consult with their respective groups on any trust matter, thus breaching the legal obligation of trustees always to act independently. Finally, the Trust Constitution could only be changed with the approval of a 3/4 majority of the Board of Trustees, meaning that it was impossible to change the Constitution against the Council's wishes. And it was this defective Constitution that enabled the Trust, with the full support of the Council, not to be locally representative and not to operate for the benefit of the communities it was intended to serve. In other words, to be institutionally racist. And to help and to heap greater ignominy on this, the council decided that any benefits derived from the trust must be allocated across the board to the whole of the borough and not just the communities affected and devastated by the Westway. So I support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. I'd now like to ask Councillor Siren if you'd like to sum up the amendment. Councillor Siren, would you wish to sum up the amendment that you proposed?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I was having some troubles with the mute button. I was heartened by Councillor Mason's comments that we all recognise and learn from what happened and we move forward. And for me, it will also be a pleasure to see us start to right those wrongs. But I'm trying not to rise to his challenge about the council involvement. We all accept that and have apologised for the council's part in allowing institutional racism to develop. And I do really also appreciate Councillor Blakeman's report, the historical report, much of which I'm familiar with and have not acknowledged in my speech, and it's referenced in the amendment. I also wanted to echo Kim's comments about our commitment to work with the Trust to use these spaces for maximum possible community benefit. And I also wanted to touch on Councillor Ali's comments about wasted opportunities, which I just found really get to the heart of what this is all about, and no more, Mr. Mayor. But I wouldn't be able to sum up without returning to the key learnings of the Tutu report, the findings of institutional racism and the exclusion and disrespect that it implies, denying services and resources to those who have a right to them. And I really do want to thank everybody for participating in the discussion tonight. It's a subject matter that's very close to my heart, and I really hope we will see speedy progress and a return of these assets to the people they belong to. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Mason, do you wish to respond as the proposer of the motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, of course, I'm very heartened on the discussion across both parties. And before I forget, can I just pick up on what Councillor Siren said? And of course, she's made some very useful comments about healing, and so has Councillor Algie. But she just finished up by saying that, of course, the council recognises that services, because of institutional racism, which we all accept happened, were denied to the local community. But of course, the motion, the amendment takes that out of the original motion, denying them services and trust resources, etc. That's been taken out of the motion. And Councillor Blakeman, of course, speaks to the decision-making control over the council, which of course is also taken out of the motion. But we have to live. We have to live with your majority, I guess. Councillor Rossi, of course, made absolutely excellent points about the fact that that the racism, McPherson, the Westway 23, of course, who majored on this, and without Niles and Toby, we probably would not, of course, have had the investigation into this, and would have probably gone on for another 10 years with the sort of battles that we saw between the local community and the Westway Trust. Councillor Ali, of course, talked about the inequalities and he counterposed the aims and objectives that the trust said they were meant to be dealing with social, economic, and health, etc., which of course they were obviously not, because they were found to be institutionally racist. And Councillor McVeigh, of course, talked about a new beginning, which we all have to hope goes forward, and about Wilf Walker, Roden Gordon, and Peppy Francis, and all of those who were at times working with the trust and on the trust board. And it's worth pointing out that Peppy Francis, of course, who tried extremely hard to get through to the board, he had a mass camp behind the Acklam Play Centre, where opposite the tent on Portobello Road. And of course, when he fell out with the late director, effectively retaliated by bulldozing his base and by sending him legal letters on his banned rehearsals, which was on Trust land at Acklam Road, which of course Councillor Atkinson wrote a letter to the Trust and the Council challenging that. So a lot of people were involved in the past, and many of them were hurt because of what we now know as institutional racism. And we hope that the new, and I do recognise that Toby and the new, what was the Westway 23, the new regime, will hopefully take forward. It's going to be a huge job, of course, because it's quite difficult to turn a huge ship around. It's been moving in one direction. And Councillor Taylor Smith talked about properties and how we need to, how the council and the trust presumably needs to move from, or has moved from, the corporate property element to social investment and so on. Yeah, of course, and I recognise entirely that none of this probably would have happened if it hadn't been for what happened at Grenfell and the 72 dead who we're still looking for justice for. Everything has moved because of that. So, as I've often said before, again and again in many different meetings, that 72 people had to die to make the changes that are now happening. So, but I, of course, would of course exhort the council to support the original motion, because the speakers who have spoken, including the movers of the amendment, have actually acknowledged that the issues they've taken out of the main motion and excluded from the amendment were actually factors were actually factors in what has happened. So of course you're going to use your majority to agree the amendment. But as I say, the speakers have already agreed what is in the original motion. So I'm very long in the tooth about this, but I just think it's a bit to say one thing and do another, to vote on another on an amendment that doesn't reflect what the discussion we've just had, doesn't seem to add up, basically. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Mayor, but I would definitely ask the council to support the original motion, because that's what you have actually spoken to and supported, whether you realise it or not.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Siren, you have your hand up. Is this a point of order?
No, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I did want to correct, but it's not a point of order.
What would you like to correct very quickly?
Well, I've written it in the chat. The bit about the community being denied services was not taken up at all, nor the control that the council had. So only factual amendments have been made.
Okay, thank you. So I now put the amendment to the vote. Councillor Thalasitis, is the Conservative group for or against the amendment?
We are for the amendment, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Laurent, is the Labour group for or against the amendment or abstaining?
Abstaining, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Wade, are you for or against the amendment or abstaining?
For the amendment.
Councillor Palmer, are you for or against the amendment or abstaining?
For the amendment.
Are there any other abstentions or votes not along party lines? I therefore declare the amendment carried, and I now put the motion as amended to the vote. Councillor Thalasitis, is the Conservative group for or against the motion as amended?
Yeah, I was going to say, before I answer, I can see that Councillor Press has put a note in the chat, and I wanted you to, well, I suggest we deal with it.
Thank you, Councillor Thalasitis. May I speak, Mr. Mayor, to the motion as amended?
Well, I had actually moved to a vote, Councillor Press. I have done quite a fair cross-section across both parties in the chamber of this. I have now moved to a vote, so I think it will be improper to take another speech. I will give you 1 minute, please, and then I must go to the vote as I've already started the vote.
I only wanted to, now it has been amended, just acknowledge the importance that this council has acknowledged its history and offered an unreserved apology, and the fact that I don't think this would have happened if in any council leadership prior to 2017. And I wanted to note very briefly that when I was Labour Group nominee 2016 to 19, that although I personally don't think councillors should hold nominated places on the trust board, as the trust should have been seen to be totally independent of the council, that I did note how the group who worked often in my living room, that wanted change and community involvement, included very much Councillor McVeigh and Councillor Siren as individual trustees, SOF in bringing in the human resources and independent legal advice to support evidence of whistleblowers, and of course Anne in her work that continues with maintaining and rebuilding the Westway stables with Sarah and the community members at the centre. So yes, this council needs to apologise unreservedly, but as an institution for the past, but I also note that individual councillors from both sides of this chamber have, can and should in the future make important individual contributions and support the new community board, the new chair and board members in any way we can. I attended the AGM last month and I felt privileged to be part of such a meaningful and insightful event, and how much has been achieved in such a short and difficult time by Toby and the new community board. So all councillors, if you don't feel familiar with the changes the current board has already made, please make yourself familiar as assistance by all individuals would, I'm sure, be welcome. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't want to speak on that before.
Thank you. So I do now move to the vote. I declare the amendment carried and I put the motion as amended to the vote. Councillor Thalcides, is the Conservative group for or against the motion as amended?
We're for the motion as amended. May I apologise for introducing Councillor Press. I know that you chair the meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Laurent, is the Labour group for or against the motion or amended as amended or abstaining? You're for. Councillor Wade, for or against the amendment? Councillor Palmer, you for or against the motion as amended or abstaining?
For.
Are there any abstentions or votes not along party lines? I declare the motion as amended carried.